Good evening. If you can see me, if you can see us, it can only mean one thing. It's Mental Health Monday. Good evening. Once again, happy Monday to you, and welcome to another edition of Mental Health Monday. I'm Pastor Trevor Phillips, along with my cohort and colleague and brother in Christ, Dr. Quentin Moss, founder and CEO and Chief Medical Officer of Modern Psychiatry. How are you doing today, my friend?
Doing well, my friend. Doing well. Glad to be around in this nice day of May. Right?
Yes, a beautiful month of May. Not so much being a promoter of all of the signs and zodiac signs. I jokingly say I am a proud Taurus. What all that means, and people that know me say, "Yes, you are stubborn as a bull." Uh, Today marks another day that has gone past on this 23rd day of May of Mental Health Awareness Month. And again, for the past year and a half, we have been diligently and we have been continuously doing our best to inform those that view our show of what mental illness is and our attempt to create awareness and also to erase some stigmas. And tonight, if there were one or two or three disorders that would be featured on a billboard, which would create a stigma about mental illness in general, tonight's topic would be one of them, and that is multiple personality disorder. This is a disorder that affects approximately 2 million people in the US alone, um, though it does not affect as many as people as we might think. The effects in the disruption of lives is dramatic in comparison to some other mental illnesses. It is one of those things that creates fear for those that know people who suffer from this disorder. It is a disorder that seemingly causes people to be ostracized and stigmatized to a disproportionate degree as compared to other disorders. So let's look and go a little deep tonight. What is multiple personality disorder?
That terminology changed a little bit around 1994, and now we call it dissociative identity disorder.
Mhm.
And what it is, it's the brain's way of trying to cope sometimes with stress or trauma. And we tend to think about this word of disassociation or
Mhm.
some separation from reality.
Mhm.
So people with this condition have the tendency to have a different personality or different personalities, actually, at least two. They may erupt at any particular time. And when these particular personalities erupt, they may have distinct behaviors, ways of thinking, speech, may have their own memories. And the person often, when these personalities erupt, have no recollection of what's occurred while this other personality had taken over their presentation. So that's the gist of this multiple personality disorder or dissociative personality disorder.
So let's go on a little deeper. We talk about someone in our casual conversation. They have a strong personality, or they have
Yeah.
a dominant personality, and so uh, not to get so deep into it, but a little deep, we get into a little Sigmund Freud type stuff. What is personality?
The personality is really how we present ourselves. It's our way of thinking. It is our mannerisms, our behaviors, and then the experiences that go along with that. So, all of us have a spectrum of what we can call our personality, right? But people with this particular condition, they can have very distinct, seemingly people within them that
Wow.
then takes over with speech, behavior, memories, activities for which the person does not have any recollection of. So this DID or dissociative identity disorder is really, part of a constellation of illnesses where people tend to just kind of separate from reality and have their brain on auto drive doing other things and then have difficulty recalling what's happened during that time or have difficulty recalling previous events.
Wow. So each personality takes on a life of its own.
Life of its own, memories of their own. So there may be memories that may be stored within one personality that the other personality or the host person has no awareness of. They can take on mannerisms of different ages. They can have different accents or sometimes dialects. And there have been some in the literature that show that people from one personality to the other may have changes in their heart rate or blood pressure that's even different than the other. So this is how the brain, this powerful brain, responds to certain types of stress and what it can do to our minds and our bodies in trying to cope with that.
Wow. So a person that has more than one personality, it's is it possible that during different times of day or different periods of the day, um, one might be more dominant than the other? Because you mentioned the word host personality.
Yeah.
Uh, what's a host personality?
So the host is the person who's suffering, right? The person who has the condition. And then they can have these other presentations or identities or personalities or alters, these all terms for the same thing that may come out. You're right. So there may be a time of the day where a particular personality may come out more prevalent than other times. And there may be triggers for that. There may be triggers that may hint back to a former abuse or trauma that allows for this other personality to come out. But yeah, they can be a pattern throughout the day where an alter may come out at different times. But usually there's a trigger for it. And as a person is transitioning from one alter to the other, we typically have changes in eye movement, excessive blinking. People may change their posture, or there may be certain other facial changes which show this transition from one personality to the next. Now, this is not, this entity where someone says, "Oh, you got a split personality. 1 minute you're mad, and 1 minute you're happy." It's
Hmm.
not that at all. It's not when people have significant changes with their mood or significant changes in how they may make a decision. This is really a whole different persona with way of speaking, mannerisms, memories that are very different from the person who's suffering.
You mentioned the whole thing about trauma. So I would assume that trauma has a lot to do with those persons developing this condition. And so
There is.
the question is, at what point in life would one begin exhibiting and developing these personalities?
Mhm.
Uh, and what would be the reason for doing so?
So these personalities can present themselves in childhood or in late life. There is no rhyme or reason as to when they may actually present. So people can have these symptoms since childhood, and no one's really had an understanding of why the behavior may change so abruptly until they get in to seek treatment. And then we
Mhm.
see that this person has suffered from, this medical condition. So no, it doesn't have to happen, in middle of life or in our 20s or 30s. I mean, this could be someone in their 60s or it could be someone who's 6 or 7 years old.
Wow. Well, I think the challenge is in terms of understanding those persons with this disorder, that it wasn't something they were born with, but was something that their environment brought to the forefront.
Well, that is an area of debate. So we know that a large proportion of people who have this medical condition have suffered some type of very intense life experience or trauma, right? So that's one theory, that there is a trauma that's occurred and these people have this condition. But then there's another theory that there may be people who may be more at risk to the power of suggestion. So they're able to absorb things and behaviors and stimuli and incorporate those things very easily. And we also believe that these people may also have neuroanatomy that's a little bit different than other people. So certain parts of the brain appear to be a little bit larger, certain regions, and certain regions of the brain appear to be a little bit smaller, right? Which may create a predisposition or risk for this happening. I think that most of the field believes that it's a combination. It's people who have trauma who also have this neuroanatomy or brain circuitry, which places them at risk, and hence we have this condition.
And you really never know until you have, unfortunately, you experience some type of trauma that you have a different type of wiring in your brain. It's just like some people who may not have high blood pressure or other pre-existing conditions that may set them up for having a heart attack or stroke, have a stressful event or a period, and then you hear about them having a heart attack.
Yeah, I think that this is a condition that surely exhibits itself more when there's a great deal of stress or triggers, things that may remind them of a previous trauma.
It's always good when we have these discussions. It's a blessing when we have persons that are alive to share and give their insight about living with this disorder. But it's just, I believe it's effective and informative as we share documentaries or interviews with people that are living with this particular disorder. And so tonight we have one that we like to share.
Breakfast time is a busy time at the Patillo home. The only place busier than the kitchen is Christine Patillo's mind.
I'm just extra special.
Tristan, you are extra special.
I love you. I love you. But I love me.
What do we have going?
Cindy was just out.
Christine has 6 other personalities called alters
Am I Aunt Annie?
living inside her head.
You don't like blueberries in your pancakes either, do you?
I don't actually mind them. She despises fruit.
All distinct and different, all with their own voice.
I can hear them if I'm paying attention. They can look out through my eyes and they can see what's ever in my peripheral.
Dada, one more.
Sure.
Try it out.
That is 2-year-old Cindy. The rest of the gang, as they're called, will introduce themselves.
I'm Christine.
I'm Chrissy. I'm Tristan, the lone male.
I'm she. I am Q. I do all the beads. I'm Rim.
Christine has dissociative identity disorder, formerly known as multiple personality disorder. It's recognized by the American Psychiatric Association and affects just a fraction of 1% of the population.
I, of course, always get to play.
Who's my wife gonna partner up with?
I'll be the shuffler.
Doctors say Christine's brain got shuffled, fractured is the clinical term, when she was a little girl.
I just seem to be going the wrong direction all the time.
And that's different from when?
Funny.
Oh, that's what I'm going to do. Here, shebang.
That didn't work out well for me at all.
Christine suffered physical and emotional abuse from her father throughout her childhood and what can be politely described as torturous sexual abuse at the hands of a neighbor from the ages of 7 to 9. Her childhood, a cruel game of survival.
That was complete being imprisoned in my mind.
Drawings Christine did in therapy show the violent battles inside her head. Doctors say when the brain can't handle any more abuse, it fractures into different personalities, and each one often serves a purpose. Instead of Christine suffering the sexual abuse, Rim, a tough tomboy, would appear and absorb the shame. The alter She, a gruff 30-year-old lesbian, would come out and take on the abuse from Christine's father. But as Christine got older, the personalities that once protected her turned.
There's a little bit of a triangle scar from a tip of an iron.
Rim led Christine to the dangerous world of drugs and promiscuity, Christine waking in places with people she didn't remember. Alter She was the worst abuser.
And we have a scar on in our hairline from when she smashed a picture frame. She used to smash pots and pans on us, and we'd have really big gnarly bruises and burns. Burning was a big thing.
It went on for years.
It's so frightening to feel like you don't have access to your mind or can keep control, or that people think that you're a freak or that something's going on.
It's been a trying 26 years of marriage, to say the least, for Christopher. The couple never had children because between Christopher, Christine, and her 6 other personalities, 8 was enough. He's been husband, father, friend, and enemy, often all within the same 60-second span. The diagnosis 10 years ago answered a lot of questions for him. One question, however, never needed answering.
Why did you stay?
This is my life, and this is my wife, and it's a beautiful thing, and I love being on the journey with her. Whoop, 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 whoop. Come on, Dixie girl.
Let's go for a walk, Dixie. Come on.
After 2 decades of therapy, Christine has come to control the people living in her head.
But all is well.
It is.
The abuse from her other personalities has stopped, and Christine lives a relatively routine life. In fact, the alters are actually helping her to better integrate into society.
These are my bead people. Everything I make is one of a kind.
This is Q, who has started her own small business selling beaded jewelry. Christine watches Q do this from inside her own head and feels inspired to do more in public herself. For Q, it's more about changing others, not the 6 alters.
Different is uncomfortable for a lot of people, and we're just trying to make our different not be so spooky or so confusing to people.
One major step in that direction, the book Christine has written about her experience. One face with 7 voices, hoping to bring understanding and acceptance to a disorder so hard to comprehend.
We're at a
Just a glimpse into the world of someone who has to deal with this very complex disorder. One of the things that really strikes me about this disorder, and we alluded to it earlier in our conversation, is how one personality can have their distinct attributes about that personality. The fact that as they were cooking breakfast, to say that one personality preferred blueberries and to suggest that one didn't. That's deep to me, Dr. Moss.
It is deep, but it shows the power of what the brain can do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the brain, as I mentioned, can become fractured, but if you had to think about the processing speed that has to take place to switch from one personality to the next over the course of 60 seconds, and even what we saw there, and being able to then formulate all the likes, dislikes, volume of voice, tone of voice, mannerism as male or female, and all of that to be created in less than a split of a second. It shows you that our brains are powerful, and it's unfortunate that it's showing its power in the midst of someone who's quite ill. But this is just a fraction of what our brains are capable of doing.
So when we talk about host personalities and we talk about alter personalities, do the alter personalities ever try to get rid of the host personality?
Well, the alters can try to torture the host person, the person who's suffering. You know, they could take on the role of the person who abused them. You know, sometimes they call that the persecutor, the person who taunts and commands maybe self-harm. And in this piece, they talked about the personality that was, actually self-harming the person. Yeah, so they can be quite torturous, but without the actual person, then nobody exists. But they can torture the person who's suffering from the illness.
Yeah, and put them in danger because, as she shared, she was waking up, in places, being promiscuous with people she didn't know, putting herself at risk.
Mm-hmm. About 70% of the people who suffer from this condition, attempt suicide.
Mhm.
So when we think about, what do we need to have as a high priority? What is the first thing that we need to do in helping people who come to care? It is, how can we create an environment of safety? How can we start helping people to cope? How to recognize when they're starting to lead down a path of self-interest behavior, or when they may have periods where they may become aggressive with other people, in response to their previous trauma. So safety is number one, and then trying to find ways to help the person to process their trauma, if it indeed is there. Help them to process that is number two, and there are some therapies that can help people do that. And then thirdly, we try to help people to treat the accompanying disorders. So people often have a great deal of depression. For sure, a lot of people have post-traumatic stress disorder. So finding the medications that can appropriately treat those conditions, and hoping that we can help them to have less symptomatic of their DID.
Well, the interesting thing is that, for me, as watching that clip, is that not only did she take on and have alters, but they weren't always gender specific.
Yes. Right. They had different genders, different sexuality, and that makes for a very challenging experience for people who are in relationship with them.
And what we know about people that have been abused, particularly sexually, is that many, not all, may bear it out by being promiscuous. And it was really interesting to me that the promiscuity really came in the form of same-sex attraction.
Well, I don't know that we can say a whole lot about, gender attraction and sexuality out of trauma, right? So I'm not sure we can say a whole lot about that. But what I think we can say is that sometimes when we're hypersexual or impulsive with our sexuality or promiscuous, for some people, it is a way of trying to go back and gain control and have mastery over that situation. Typically, when we have people who have been abused, they're in a powerless situation. The leverage is against them. So for some people, unconsciously, promiscuity may be a way of them trying to figure out a way to do this in such a way that they can have the power, they can have the mastery and the control in a situation of trauma where they did not. So that's just one element that comes out of sexual trauma, and perhaps some people who may have difficulties with promiscuity.
Yeah, and it's really, really hard to tell. It's a case-by-case basis. But I find it very challenging. I would think it would be for persons to have a relationship, but she's been married for 26 years. How would you characterize, just in that short clip, the demeanor and what's needed to give care and support for someone who has that many personalities?
Well, of course, long suffering and patience. That's big. And being able to communicate with number two, and then three, having to set boundaries on behaviors. When one of the other personalities starts to do things that are unhealthy or unsafe, being able to step in and try as best we can to redirect that person with those behaviors. So hats off to that gentleman for being able to have the patience and the love, clearly unconditional love, in being able to kind of manage and withstand the challenges that she has with her illness.
And for him to fall in the role to what's needed for that time,
Yeah.
After he saw the 2-year-old, the 2-year-old personality sucking on her thumb, he came like a loving father, kissing the forehead, which says a lot about his ability to adapt and to change.
Yeah.
Again, it's just such a more pronounced mental illness. And I think that some people may even have this DID and not even know it.
Yeah, I think it's quite possible that people do. It's not all the time that people can have recollection of what's occurred, when other personalities are at the forefront. A lot of people may not have any recollection, of what's occurred, or may not have even realized that they exhibited another personality. So you can imagine all of the health, social, and legal fallout of having other personalities, which may have behaviors that you may not be aware of, as we disassociate, as we separate from reality. So it's, again, a very challenging illness. Now, that being said, we have people who can be very high functioning and being able to manage a family and be able to work with this condition. But we also have people who are quite impaired, who are not able to maintain employment, who struggle with maintaining relationships because of some of the outcomes from this illness.
Yeah, I think that, like any other illness, there are some similarities of this illness that, resemble other mental illnesses. And so can this be one of those disorders that's often misdiagnosed?
So what we probably have is, where we may find a misdiagnosis, if someone who's not really paying careful attention, they may diagnose them with a psychotic disorder, where the patient's not psychotic, the patient's just struggling with disassociation. Another condition which resembles this a great deal, oftentimes could be borderline personality disorder, where people may have behaviors that may be quite impulsive, significant mood swings or mood lability associated with that. So that is one that will probably look a lot like, people who have DID. And then people may misdiagnose them with having bipolar disorder because, again, impulsive behaviors and mood swings. But of course, that's not it either. So it takes a careful eye. And typically, this is a diagnosis that will be made over time. So it's not, it's often not the case. I'm going to sit down with someone and within, 5-10 minutes or even 50 minutes, be able to make this diagnosis accurately. This is something in which you're getting to know the patient and you're noticing these mannerisms and changes. Her changes were quite distinct, right? Quite distinct. You knew clearly as a person as she was shifting from personality to personality. Other people with their changes may not be as distinct, right? You notice that things became odd for 15 or 20 minutes, or the behavior seemed to change subtly for 15 to 20 minutes. So it may not be as obvious as that. So again, this is one of those things that you want to make sure that you're with a mental health provider who can watch you over time and make the accurate diagnosis.
So even with these disorders, this disorder, can the other alters suffer from mental illness themselves?
Typically they can have, again, their behavior patterns, which will be sometimes different than the person who's the host or the person who's suffering, but not necessarily suffer from their own illnesses, though they may have their own memories, right? So memories can be siloed or compartmentalized between the alters. So one alter A may have very different memories of what has occurred than alter B.
Yeah, because one of her alters was susceptible to drug abuse,
Mhm.
and though it affected, explain a little bit about what was mentioned in that piece, how the host was observing what the other personality was doing and was encouraged by the alter who was more in the public and took the initiative to start a business.
Mhm. So people can visualize, this entity, and it's almost as if they can see the switch occurring before that. It's almost like the change of a cards of a Rolodeck. Some people can
Mhm.
visualize that, and however, some people cannot
Mhm.
and do not recall that this change took place unless they find themselves in a very different circumstance than they remember before the switch occurred. Then they know that one of the alters must have, had strength to come forward and to kind of take over their behavior.
Wow. Wow. Well, this has been extremely fascinating
Mhm.
today. I might ask one other question in terms of, does this disorder affect um, more males and females? Are theories with different, or some people in different racial groups and ethnic groups
Mhm.
more susceptible and prone to develop this disorder?
It's interesting that you say that. So, as we get into adulthood, we seem to diagnose more women with this than men, right? And but when we have kids who have this, we see just as many boys as we see girls. But there are a lot of things that in our human experience and how we express illness are cultural. So the way that someone may express DID in America may be very different than someone who expresses DID in Thailand.
Wow.
Sometimes people look at this disassociation as a demon possession, and that's the way that they describe it. Or they may look at it as they're having their body taken over by something much greater or out of this world, and that's the way that they describe it. And we probably have it such that within certain communities and cultures, even within our country, that DID may be expressed differently.
Mm.
Remember that what we are exhibiting as far as what these personalities are to some degree videotapes of what this person has seen in life, right? So at
Mm.
some point they saw someone who acted like a tomboy and had these behaviors, right? So and then the subconscious is able to kind of play that back as a personality alter. So a lot of what we experience with illness has the influence of the culture in which we live.
Very, very, very fascinating. Because I would think that even in this region where we practice voodoo and some regions where we practice witchcraft, that may display and one may develop a personality that is directly impacted by that culture. And it
Yeah.
just, go ahead. Mhm.
Now, I was just saying, yeah, I think that nothing's off the table in regards to
Mhm.
what we're exposed to and
Mhm.
how we can incorporate that into the personalities that we exhibit.
Well, it really speaks to what you say a lot and what you said today, especially how complex and how powerful our brain is.
Mhm.
And when we have these conversations and these various disorders, each time we have them, I'm yet fascinated, even when preparing for the show and then actually engaging in conversation, just how complex the brain is. Treatment options range from medications and is in therapy, I presume.
Yeah, so if we were to think about, what has the greatest impact,
Hmm.
therapy for sure. Cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy are particularly when we think about CBT. That's has help with managing trauma related stress. Those therapies are very effective in helping people to be able to treat this condition. We in the past have leaned a lot more on psychodynamic therapy to be able to help with that. The medications we prescribe are effective as we try to treat those other conditions which might be associated with this. As I mentioned, treating depression and post-traumatic stress disorder or other anxiety disorders.
How important is it, Dr. Moss, with this disorder and with other mental disorders, for us to speak truth, reality, and to confront behaviors that are inappropriate for those that are displaying some of these disorders, specifically tonight, because if one of the alters is doing something inappropriate, how effective is that in terms to be able to say, you know what, whatever personality is, that's inappropriate? Is that an effective response?
Yeah, I think when we're trying to make sure that we maintain safety, respecting the rights of other people, trying to make sure that we help them to keep themselves out of harm's way, for sure, having to redirect them. But I will say, whenever we take on a disposition and a role that is similar to the person who may have traumatized them, that's where we start to create challenges, because now we start to perhaps deepen some of the personality of the person who was traumatized, or we may provoke another personality to come out who feels as if they need to defend this person against what could be a perceived threat, right? So we don't want to come across in a very threatening demeanor by any means, right? We want to present ourselves as someone who's safe and that they can trust, and at the same time helping them to set boundaries on behaviors which lead to their detriment.
The memories in that old hippocampus yet lives and reigns even in the various personalities.
Yeah.
So those of you that are watching tonight, again, we hope that we achieved our objective, which was to inform you of this disorder and to let you know that mental health is health in general. And many people, especially who are affected by this disorder, have developed it of no fault of their own. And so hopefully we leave here tonight with a sense of hope and understanding that we'll be able to react in an appropriate way to those that not only exhibit this disorder, but other disorders as well. Dr. Moss, would you give your number again to our audience for those who may be in need of help?
So that number is 513-440-5117. That's 513-440-5117. Thanks, Pastor.
To all of you that have watched tonight and will be watching as the show airs in the upcoming days, we want to encourage you, as always, to feel better, become better, and live better. Good night, everyone.